Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities, and I am one of your hosts, Sarah Chang, and not joining me today is Bernie Rhyme, who he'll be sharing his What's Up in the Night Sky, but otherwise it's just me and a very secret guest. Reach out to us at WMPG, scientifically speaking, at gmail.com, or on Twitter at WMPG-SciSpeak. So Bernie, what's up in the night sky for this coming week?
Yes, thanks for asking, Sarah. We have an excellent week coming up. Mars will be at its very best in 15 more years. It was physically closest to the Earth a couple days ago on the 6th, but it'll be at opposition on the 13th, so that's this week. That means it'll be directly opposite the sun from the Earth, which means it's going to come up exactly at sunset, and it's not going to set until sunrise. So the full moon does this every month, but Mars is just doing it now once every 26 months. And as I said, this will be the best one in the next 15 years. So make sure you get out there and see that. I've been watching it pretty much for the last several months. It was coming up around midnight and a little bit earlier every night. It's going to be right at sunset now. So that'll be a good thing to watch. It's a last quarter moon, so that means it doesn't come up till about midnight, a little bit before. We had the full harvest moon about a week ago, and I was lucky enough to be able to see it rise from Pine Point Beach in Scarborough. I was actually taking part in a drum circle. So that was really neat. I mean, those are pretty neat, even if you just go to the beach or just watch any full moon. But this is the once a year annual harvest moon. And there were lots of other people, maybe just 12 or so in the circle. And there were a couple of clouds first. So it didn't come up exactly when I expected, because I had even written all my students about it. It was 6:44 p.m. to be precise. So about 11 minutes later, finally broke through the cloud bank, still had a nice orange color, and then we could watch it rise, and then everything else was happening. So it was pretty neat. So actually the night after, which was on October 2nd, so hopefully some of you saw this, it was a half a degree away from Mars. So the night it was full, Mars came up like maybe 20 minutes later, and then the moon was right next to Mars, and then it kept going by a difference of 12 degrees every consecutive night. And now it's the last quarter moon. But still look for it. I mean, Jupiter and Saturn are still close together. Jupiter is now both in direct motion, so it's catching up with Saturn. So you won't notice it night by night, but within a few nights, you should notice Jupiter's getting closer. Remember, they're going to be at their closest in 400 years on the winter solstice, December 21st.
Wow.
That unfolds for the whole rest of the season. That'll be really neat. And Mars will still be bright. I mean, it'll be really good for another couple months. It's like a campfire red color. You can see details. We saw some details through telescopes on Mars, ice caps and dark markings, all kinds of neat things. And as I mentioned last time, we're sending lots of missions. They should be there late this winter. So those are your three planets. If you want to see Venus, you have to be up around 4. So either stay up late or get up early. And you can't see Mercury right now. So that's pretty much it, what's going on for this week.
No meteor showers coming up?
Well, actually, there was one. It was cloudy on the 8th, so that would be like just yesterday. We had one called the Draconid, so maybe you can still see a few of them. They're only about 10 per hour, and then the good meteor showers, October 21st, the Orionid. So I'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Sweet.
That's about it.
Thank you, Bernie.
Okay, you're welcome.
And if Bernie talked way too fast, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. So, my esteemed guest for today, joining me.
My secret?
Joining me in the room is Andrew Young.
Not so secret anymore.
Not the cat's out of the bag. Graphic designer turned web developer with thankview.com. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Very nice kitchen. The studio is okay.
There does need to be a little bit more sound canceling here, but yeah, it's a little, so if it's a little echoey, guys. But no, thank you for coming out here and joining us. And
My
really
pleasure.
excited to have you on, actually. So let's kind of start things off a little, give people a little bit of a background and kind of an understanding of why you're even on the show. But
Sure.
So your company does something really new that I had never actually heard of. And I remember when you first described it to me, it was based on kind of this digital invitation service, which that was what my impression was. And so I just always believed that for this whole time that you've been working there. And so during the pandemic, I thought, oh, I must not be very active right now. But it's actually very different. So what exactly does ThankView do?
Sure. So again, since we always have this problem, it's ThankView. Just in case anybody may have misheard. So like thank as in thank you, view as in like a video view. So it's thankview.com is the web service that I work for. We're a startup based in New York City. And basically we're a web platform for our clients to use for personalized video outreach and donor relations in specific. I think that's worth noting because our main clients are nonprofits and universities. So basically a simple scenario is like maybe alumni relations or maybe a department that's trying to raise money from alumni. They would actually put together a simple video that's personalized for that alumni, and it would send out to a list of contacts, and said alumni would maybe receive a text or just a nice email with a video from their alma mater or from a department maybe that they used to be a part of, and basically it's just a personalized video outreach to raise money, or just some sort of like client communication. That's basically it.
Yeah, so I was actually really surprised when you sat down and described it in detail to me, because then I thought that's perfect for this time.
Yeah.
Especially this time where we can't, see people in person and go up to people in person.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a type of kind of customer relationship kind of service definitely companies are starting to think about more as things are so remote now, and unfortunately for this foreseeable future. So I think that's definitely, people have definitely been thinking about that, and that's proven just with the amount of interest we've gotten from like a lot of different colleges and nonprofits in the last few months. That kind of personable communication is just really important right now, especially, from business to client.
Right, versus a, hey, name from a list that it just kind of rotates through. Please donate.
Yeah, right. Or or just like a cold call. Yeah, or like you said, like a letter. A video from somebody that you used to work with, or maybe rising students at the college you used to go to. Is just feels a lot more special.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to describe kind of what you do: programmer, software engineer. Web developer, front-end engineer, front-end developer. But you specifically work on kind of bringing to life the web designer's work.
Right. So in the world of really, in the world of web development, really any software engineering or software development, there's front-end and then there's back-end. And yes, I'm a front-end developer, specifically working in web, because ThankView's app is a web app, so it exists on the World Wide Web. It's not just something that's exclusively on like cell phones per se. You can access it through your web browser. And I being a front end developer, that means I work in the web technologies that basically bring the visual aspect and the user interactions to life. When you go to thankview.com, that is a website that is designed, by our product designers and brought to life as a real interactive app by the front end developers.
Yeah. And so actually, that's interesting because, I hear web app all the time, but, I always believe that software engineers can develop software, which traditionally I associated it with programs like the programs that Adobe might make, like Illustrator, Photoshop, or like Microsoft Office, Word, PowerPoint, whatever. But with web-based technologies, that's really changed how many companies and services build applications in their programs. And I wonder, so I was trying to think of like an analogy, but the one that kind of came to mind, and I almost don't even think that this is the same, but the one that comes to mind is when, for example, Microsoft Office and Adobe, originally their software was built for those, for Mac or for Windows PC, but then somewhere like 2016, 2017, for example, they started to shift into like the cloud base.
Sure.
Is that at all like related or completely not
Yeah.
related?
It certainly is related. I think in this example, you have software like Adobe Photoshop. You have a version for it that is, or maybe like Microsoft or Outlook, right, as like a mail client. You have these programs that are for platform, or for platforms. Those platforms being Mac OS or Windows, Microsoft Windows. Web apps, you can think of it like pieces of software for the web. The web is its platform. So anything that can access, anything that can, any web client you have can access these apps. So in this case, any computer with a web browser or any phone with a web browser, you can access our app, and you would get this. You would get like the quote unquote native experience.
Sure. So dialing it back, I think like in this day and age, every person who has grown up and gone through our K through 12 system from the mid 90s on has at some point in their education made a website using, I don't know, I think that's kind of true. I mean, us growing up, I don't know about you, but I was on Lisa Explains all the time. I don't know if you know this website. It was Lissa, Lisa. And she made she just taught you how to use HTML, CSS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just remember being on that. It was like, the ugly fuchsia with the cyan colors,
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, it sounds so interesting that, web development has evolved to, you're talking about like web apps and like the wrapping and like, it sounds so much more complicated than what I thought web development was, which was literally just HTML, CSS, and that's what I thought it was. But then like that has evolved, and it seems like it's encompassing more and more components to it.
Yeah. I would say it's definitely more complicated now from the development standpoint. I think back in the day, like the Web 1.0 days, I think that was definitely a simpler time. You definitely had much more static websites that were built primarily just HTML and CSS. JavaScript was definitely used in a much more limited manner. I think nowadays you see JavaScript interacting or being incorporated much more with interactions, animations, a lot of stuff that would have been handled by back-end logic might just be handled on the front end now.
Because it's so much more powerful nowadays that you can do that?
Yeah, it's JavaScript has evolved, and also our hardware has evolved. There's probably a hardware component, so your average cheap cell phone can kind of compile and run a lot of JavaScript a lot easier than maybe back in the day. But yeah, I think it's also just I think people also just have a higher standard for kind of interactive experiences now too. Yeah. And JavaScript really can bring to life some more robust web apps.
Yeah. Do you think that I guess a lot of people assume that because younger people now, right now, grew up with technology, or like us, we kind of grew up with technology, like as it was, becoming bigger and bigger. And so they assume that younger people are just better at technology. And I think maybe we can get to that a little bit later, but why do you think it's harder for some older folks to use and understand how to use technology, even though, I always found it interesting because I thought that the original framework of, say, a computer was really based on, like, the visual structure and everything was really very much inspired by life, business, where you have a filing system, and that seemed really straightforward. Our save button is forever going to be this floppy disk.
Yeah.
Like the address book, and it's all like legacy 1970s, 1980s, and yet, that just didn't click.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to bring up about like the design language with like early operating systems. They call it skeuomorphic design, where like where you would have this digital representation of a real life action, visually represented as its real life counterpart. In iOS, probably before 2012, I think before Johnny Ives kind of took over, like for like the iOS like design, you would have the Notes app actually look like a notepad with lines, and I think there were even like I forget if it was like torn edges or maybe like spiraled top. You kind of have this cheesy, really on the nose design, and I think as just the world continues to grow up, and we have more and more generations being like digital natives, I think we will see that go away. We probably are already seeing that go away.
Do you think our save button will ever change?
That's a good question. I think maybe it already has started to change. You kind of see that icon nowadays. It's like the downward arrow onto like a bracket or onto a folder. Yeah. I think I'm definitely starting to see that.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, but yeah, kind of back to your original question, like, yeah, like I think technology, the pace at which it's grown is probably what makes it hard for people past a certain age to keep up. Like the speed at which the internet went from just being used for a simple e-commerce site or blogging websites to handling literally everything through a cell phone is pretty staggering. Like I don't think technological improvements from say the 70s to the 90s changed how people lived their day-to-day lives all that much. Compare that to today, where people get their news via Twitter, meet romantic prospects through a cell phone app, watch all of their TV shows and movies through a web service. This has all happened in the last 10 years. And it could probably be pretty overwhelming for an older person, just like this influx of all these digital interfaces, your computer, your phone, your smart fridge, your TV your TV and Roku with 7 remotes. But I think with time, people will figure it out.
They get used to it.
Yeah, we'll finally say goodbye to that floppy disk. Yeah.
I mean, I do feel like there are still also a lot of, even me, sometimes I'm like, how do you use this app? Like, and I guess a lot of that comes down to the design and the I don't know what else, the design.
Yeah. Apps can be designed in any which way. 15 years ago, there's only 2 ways you could design a phone. There's any way you could design an app any
way you want. What are the 2 ways you can design a phone?
With a dial, with remember that?
The rotary dial.
The rotary dial, or the I forget the
like the touch-tone phone.
Yeah, the touch-tone phone. I forget how many buttons there are. Like with nine buttons.
9 plus 2.
Yeah. Oh, 9 plus 2.
No.
Oh, there's 12. I think there's 12 buttons usually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still represented digitally on the iPhone. But it's literally 2 phone designs. That's it.
Yeah. Do you think that, as like just a little earlier, we were talking about how web development has become more complex, from the early HTML, CSS days. Did you feel like the barrier to entry was pretty high? Do you think it would be higher if you had waited? It's hard to say, I think.
Do you think if I was a bit older, would it be harder to break into like the tech industry as a developer?
Because I imagine, being a web developer in 2000 was probably not that, I don't want to say it was easy, but I'm not sure if it was easy or hard.
I think the technologies were a little bit simpler. I also don't think there were as many curriculums set up to train people. I don't know, I have this notion of like maybe 15 years ago, 10 years, maybe 10 years, even 10 years ago, web developers, the people who would actually write the markup, the CSS, the JavaScript, and then like these backend technologies as well, were probably just probably a vast like minority of people that were just nerds that happened to stumble upon the right CS class, or maybe just taught themselves.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you have these boot camps, which is what I took to make a career transition, that kind of like have a really set curriculum to teach you teach you these core technologies to in a practical manner, to make you like viable for the workforce.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. No, actually, as you were speaking, I was literally thinking there was probably only 5 people developing, the 10 websites on the web at the time.
Yeah. No, it was probably disproportionately small. Yeah. The workforce. Yeah. But yeah, stuff is definitely a little more complicated now, building wise.
Right. Did you think that in the beginning you would miss design work? Because you transitioned from, you were doing kind of film and advertising and, graphic design. Which is very different, very, outward focused and less on the structural parts of it.
Yeah, like the technical
Sure.
aspects. I thought I might miss doing more creative work. But having worked in web design before, it wasn't such a hard transition to suddenly be on the other side, working on the development for a website. And it's, I naturally get to work very close with the product designers and creatives, so I don't feel so disconnected from the visual experience of the final product. So I guess I don't miss it yet because I still feel very much involved.
Yeah. Did you feel like there were any like hurdles or specific challenges when you made your transition from being a designer to becoming a developer? I mean, I think a lot of people try and take a stab at programming, and they'll sit down and they'll take a couple free classes, but they may not stick with it because it is like learning a language, and there's probably a sense of like logic that and a lot of times it's like typing hello world isn't really going to get you that far. Coming
from a designer background, there was certainly some overlap, having worked with the web before, but it was very different. Yes. And it is very hard to learn programming, with a non-technical background, I think. Yeah, and I think that really is kind of the crux of the challenge. It does feel like learning a language, but even then, programming is really unlike you're learning a new language when you're studying abroad or visiting a new country. You do have to kind of, for me especially, it was just a different way of thinking. Organizing information and then typing in a bunch of logic to somehow present it in a new way. It is just it is so different from any other type of work. And you're right. I think that when you're learning the basics, it's hard to kind of see that end goal. I remember a long time ago taking some just basic courses on like Code Academy, and like it just kind of taught you the fundamentals, but I was like, I don't know how this would. Yeah. It was hard to see how it would be eventually applicable. Before signing up for boot camp a couple of years ago, I actually decided to kind of dabble a little bit by myself. I was on YouTube looking for just any opinions on starting out programming, and I ended up on freecodecamp.org, which is actually a really great curriculum for kind of feeding you the basics of like the web technologies, but also like setting up lessons where you kind of apply the principles like in a real world fashion. So like, very early on in the curriculum, you kind of build a very simple HTML website for yourself. And so I think that kind of curriculum really helped me get over these hurdles, going through exercises that didn't hold my hand, and then also didn't hold my hand too much, but then also challenged me to like build a real world use with JavaScript and HTML and CSS.
Yeah, you need that kind of final product to feel satisfied in a way, because a lot of times they'll teach you print and do all those little basic functions, but it's like, oh great, I was able to add in code, and then it just didn't feel like it was very satisfying. And yeah, it is a kind of a long stretch kind of game where you gotta build a lot in order to get something like even just a simple game. But
yeah, definitely. I mean, for something like that's like that you'd upload to a website and present to somebody, yeah, it probably takes a lot of work to get there. But there's a lot of fun stuff too, like even without learning too much JavaScript or whatever, Python, whatever language. you might be starting out with, building up like simple, a simple function to like solve a math problem. It's little steps like that were
you
small,
found that
small,
exciting.
yeah, there were small nuggets of like fulfillment along the way,
Sure. Is there anything that with your kind of everyday technology use that now that you have gone into the side of knowing, oh, this is what it takes to make something alive, is there anything with your everyday technology that you're like, wow, I look at this differently now that I know a little bit the back end part?
Yeah, all the time. I definitely see like the cracks and sometimes in like websites like where they maybe didn't think of all the edge cases of like user interactions, and like maybe you kind of end up in a funny little state, when just filling out a form. Something I've definitely thought about, like I'm a big video gamer, and like I think having done programming, even though it's for the web, for web apps, you kind of realize that a lot of logic is a collection of like conditionals. If the user has entered in a first name and last name and a password, then they're able to continue to the next form. If not, if else statements, is what we call them. If that isn't the case, then we'll then surface a warning. And like in video games, there's so much of that everywhere. Like Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game of all time. It's like an RPG, right, from the 90s, and like a boss fight is a great example of this. And it's very transparent in this. It's like if the boss's HP is below 50%, then he'll do this attack. Or if this character in your party is HP is below this amount, then the boss will focus his attack on this. It's fun to wonder about this as you're playing a game. It's like, oh, I wonder what that condition was. Fun fact, Final Fantasy VII in particular, like I guess a lot of the source code is like easily found now. So like you could literally Google an enemy from that game, like, and end up on like the Final Fantasy Wikia.
Really?
And you could actually see the code for that enemy. So that's kind of a fun thing to look at. And it's very surprising sometimes. Sometimes like the code block is not very big. It's like it's a pretty simple, formula that just runs on repeat, it's just waiting for these conditions to happen, and that's literally the progression of the fight. Yeah.
Wow. So is that in the future, video game programming, do you think?
For me?
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, like me and my friends, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anybody. There's a lot of nerds, that do this job. And a lot of us have aspirations to like get into video game like development at some point. A lot of us start off like doing kind of web services, web apps, stuff like that. But I think a lot of us think about doing video games
that's
in the future. Yeah, but it's also a popular space. It's a crowded space. A lot of people want to.
Everybody wants to build that monster. That
everyone wants to work for Microsoft Game Studios or something like that.
Right.
Maybe.
Maybe in a couple years. Yeah. So, what do you think it takes for people who want to get into development besides just the drive and the motivation? Like, do you feel like you actually have to have a certain knack for something, or
what I would say for anybody even thinking about a career switch or just learning programming in general, absolutely try it out. Definitely do. I don't think programming is for everyone, but it is certainly something everyone can and should try because it's free, and there are really great resources at your disposal. I think a lot of people are hearing about these bootcamp, like kind of vocational school programs. They're like, oh, technology is a big thing. There's demand for good talent. I'll just sign up and become a web developer. Again, like I did take a bootcamp eventually to kind of help me really lift off the ground. But I think everybody needs to kind of get their hands dirty a little bit, just because it is free. Yeah. And also, and at the end of the day, programming isn't for everyone, but the amount of free resources really is immense, and you could learn so much without paying $1.
Well, Mr. Andrew Young, thank you so much for being on our show today.
No, thanks for having me here, Sarah. I hope somebody found my experience interesting.
Of course. You have been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on Stay tuned for Sports Jam with Colin and Connor. And from your favorite nerds, mask up, and we wish you healthy bodies and clean air.
Free resources really is immense, and you could learn so much without paying $1.
Well, Mr. Andrew Young, thank you so much for being on our show today.
No, thanks for having me here, Sarah. I hope somebody found my experience interesting. Or
Of course. You have been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMG 90.9. Stay tuned for Sports Jam with Colin and Connor. And from your favorite nerds, mask up, and we wish you healthy bodies